coming up on the Outside of Sunday podcast.
She actually came to us after. She says, I was at your concert, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the concert, the Lord just touched me, and she was on drugs, like ecstasy or something like that. She was in the mosh pit jumping, and she says she got completely, like all of a sudden, she was no longer on drugs. And then she received the Lord, and she was serving at the other church we were with. Yeah, our ministry is really kind of threefold: reach, equip, and deploy. RED Ministries. And so the reach part is the Red Rain Band. It's a rock band, but we always partner with a local church. We've been to Pakistan, Ukraine, Paris, Israel, to Dubai, but it looks like a rock band, so it doesn't really scare, especially in Europe. People are really kind of terrified of the church. If you do an outreach in a church building, no one would show up.
Hey, you're listening to the Outside of Sunday podcast. I'm Krista, and here you'll find genuine conversations and inspiring testimonies, as well as biblical encouragement on how to live your faith in and outside of Sunday. Welcome to this episode of the Outside of Sunday podcast. Welcome back. This is actually going to be our first podcast of 2025. So we're here with Natasha Turner. Thank you so much for coming from Tauranga. I mean, you are overseas. Where are you based last?
We were in the U.S. Prior to coming to NZ. We actually alternate Christmases. We have a family in New Zealand, in Tauranga, and then we also have family in California. So we come every other year.
So you're coming here from California to New Zealand, and it was just such a coincidence that I actually met your sister-in-law at the Send, New Zealand, and then the next Sunday, you and your husband were at our church, and your husband was sharing, and I thought, I'm not going to let this opportunity pass me by, and thank you so much for saying yes. I'll do a little bit of an introduction because there is a bit about you over here. So for 2 decades, Natasha and her husband Michael, along with their band Red Rain, have been using music to reach the unreached with the message of Jesus. So this has taken them to over 40 countries and reached many for Christ. Included in their outreach is meeting the needs of the poor and the needy. So in recent years, they have been able to help the hungry and displaced on the war front in Ukraine and to provide relief to those affected by the recent earthquake in Turkey. So, man, you guys are all over the place, and I love it. So, yes, welcome, Natasha. We have so much to get into today, but first I'd just really like to get to know you a little bit better. So, where are you from originally, and how did you first come to faith in Christ?
Well, I was actually born in a country that no longer exists. It was USSR.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and honestly, we left the country when it just fell apart. So it's now called Ukraine.
So I didn't realize that you were originally from Ukraine. Wow.
So I was born, because I'm like but the funny thing is I've never, people are like, oh yeah, so you're a citizen of Ukraine. I'm like, actually, I'm not. The country didn't exist as a country.
Wow.
And so we left just as it fell apart. And honestly, most of my memories of Ukraine is going there with the ministry.
How old were you when you left?
I just turned 12, and I know it sounds like people are like, oh, you grew up there. But I was born in this, the second largest city that gets bombed the most right now. And it's 2.5 million, roughly. So it was huge. It's like being born in suburb of Oakland, you know? And so I don't really remember the first 5 years as much, and then it only left me with 7. So my largest memories that I have of Ukraine is actually going with a ministry than physically being born there, which was kind of funny because my parents are like, this and this street. I was like, I have no idea. I was like, I had a revelation in 2018, we were there. I'm like, Mom, those 2 streets connect when we went there.
Is that real? Is that a memory?
Is that real? Is that what it is, And so it was but again, actually it's Michael who has the big heart for Ukraine. Because when we went in 2003, it was still very much kind of communistic in its, they had what they call an Orange Revolution in 2004. Okay. So in 2003, they were still quite closed. So I had to have a permission to come I had to have a visa to get in there. I had to all of those. And even going through the border, I was like, it's like going through a Soviet Union, those movies that you see about
all the people
that are, I went through that border. I was like, I don't want to come back here. Yeah. And so Michael and I were dating at that time. And that was my first trip to ever come back to Ukraine since leaving. And I came as a translator and to try kind of help the band along and everything. And as we were like, when I crossed the border, I was like, I don't want to go back here again. And Michael, standing with a rose, goes, "Oh, I love this country." Good for you. But the Lord had us going back there for like 20 years, And so it's been kind of so that's basically where I was born. But I really grew up in California. I'm very much of a Californian girl, because a lot of people, when they hear I'm from Eastern Europe, they're like, "Oh, you should be used to cold." I'm like, no. I'm very much of a California girl. I like to see cold once a year and go in the mountains.
Yeah. You California girl. So then, do you have an American passport? You don't have a Ukrainian passport? No.
Yeah, as I said, we left before. So because of my age, in Europe, you don't get a passport from your own until you're 16. So your photo literally gets put into, it's actually very common for Eastern European countries. And your photo gets put into your mom's or dad's passport. And so when they became U.S. citizens, that was the only connection that I've ever had,
Wow. And so Michael is the one who has a love for Ukraine.
Oh, yeah.
How did you two meet, though? You're from California. He's a Kiwi, by the way, born and raised in Tauranga.
Born in Tauranga Hospital.
Born in Tauranga Hospital. So how did you guys even meet?
So he started the ministry before we met. So our whole ministry is 25 years, and I've been part of it for 20. So there was first 5 years that he traveled before we even met. And so he was actually ministering at our church in Sacramento, California. It's a Russian-speaking church, and Sacramento has like over 100,000 of Slavic population, so that would include Russia, Belarus, Ukraine. And so it was a Russian-speaking church, and his friend that he went to Bible school a long time ago in California was our bass guitarist, and I was part of the worship team. And so and it was funny, it was like one of those, and again, there's a background story to that, but he's the one who basically introduced us. And so we were dating long distance, for pre-Skype, pre-WhatsApp.
Wow.
Yeah, and
phone calls? Letters? Emails? Yeah.
Phone calls and emails, yeah.
Romantic. That is like our modern day version of writing romantic letters, like across the globe. Email.
Yeah. Well, and every now and then I would, like, if he would be nearby, like on tour, then I would come in with my best friend or something like that. So we've done and the major trip I've done was, we were dating for about a year, and I've done a trip to Ukraine to translate. And on the way back from that trip, we went, he was doing actually a concert in Paris. And so he really wanted me to come to Paris. So I had a couple of days, and I stopped over in Paris. And so he asked me to marry him on top of the Eiffel Tower.
That is just like every girl's, romantic dream. So that is so cool. Yeah. Obviously you said yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so great. So the ministry stuff, though. So he's been traveling around. So you said he already started the ministry by the time you guys met.
Yeah.
So how long had it been going? And can you tell us a little bit about the ministry?
So the ministry really started in 1998, and Michael and I met in 2002. Okay. And so I've been full-time with the ministry since 2004. So I've done some trips with them from time to time, but full-time since 2004.
Wow.
Yeah. So pretty much the length of our marriage, So the moment that we got married, I pretty much joined the ministry full-time. And and so I've been part of all of the Red Rain albums, recording-wise.
So like vocals?
No. I was part of when they were recording. I was basically on the background. I haven't done anything musically as far as the band goes or anything like that. It's a rock band. And honestly, the whole idea, our ministry is really kind of threefold. We kind of had it really more established and kind of named as RED Ministries. It's Reach, Equip, and Deploy.
Yeah, I love that.
And so the Reach part is the Red Rain band. It's a rock band. It has a storefront of the rock band, and so but we always partner with a local church. So it's wherever we've been to Pakistan, we've been to Paris, we've been to been to Dubai. So we always partner with a local church, and they pick a venue, and we are their outreach kind of arm. But it looks like a rock band, so it doesn't really scare. Especially in Europe, people are really kind of terrified of the church.
Really?
Of its kind of like a history. We're talking generationally. Like, for instance, one of the major countries that really asked us to go to a pub, which initially Michael was like, pub? It was France. And they have a like kind of a generational dislike towards a Catholic church, and it has to do with like cardinals was just as powerful as the kings, and there was a lot of political stuff that was going on that really kind of pushed the society away. And then you add Napoleon and the revolution to all of that, and so basically, if you do an outreach in a church building, no one would show up. And so that was kind of where the red rain comes in, and then it doesn't look scary to a non-Christian person. And we've had the most amazing experiences where like a young man who was a Muslim that turned in became a Jehovah's Witness came to our concert in a pub in Avignon, and he says, I cannot explain it. I hear this music and it just makes me cry. I'm like, I always try to understand religion with my mind, but he says, I cannot explain this. And so being able to kind of minister in that way and come along, and then the church was able to disciple, and this specific young man actually is discipled in the church in France, So things like that. So that's the red. And then in 2010, so our real focus was really evangelism for several years, I said, up to 2010. And in 2010, Michael's mom passed away. So we took a break from traveling as a band and for need of healing. And we just traveled as a family. And during that time, we really started seeing the Lord really do amazing things in churches, because we would go just to churches as a families and kind of equipping the churches, but also started seeing healings where this young lady got like, she actually came to us after. She says, I was at your concert, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the concert, the Lord just touched me, and she was on drugs. She was like on, I think she said she was like ecstasy or something like that. She was in the mosh pit jumping.
So she was on ecstasy at the time of the concert?
Yeah. We did a concert at like Oregon, in this high school working with one church, and then this several years later we're in a completely different church, and she comes to us, and it's actually on our website, and she shares this testimony, and she says she got completely, like all of a sudden, like got completely healed from, she was no longer on drugs, basically. And then she received the Lord, and she was actually serving at the other church we were with. So we started seeing these things, like people are coming out sharing. We've seen like one of our pastor friends' son was at a worship event in Germany, and his ears popped open, which we didn't even know he didn't.
Was he deaf?
He was deaf from birth, and so
he was deaf from birth.
Yes.
And then at the concert at the church.
Yeah.
His ears just opened.
Yes, and he was telling his father, and we have a testimony on our website, which is funny. So we started seeing these things. There's like, as I said, I'm sharing only a couple of them, but we couldn't necessarily put that on our Red Rain Band website. For instance, Michael would talk in the middle of concerts, and share his personal testimony. I'm like, we've had the most amazing, like I'll share one of them. It was an amazing testimony where he's not necessarily hiding the fact that we're Christians, but we're not necessarily inviting people to church, but it would be a church who would be walking around and inviting people over.
I see. So it's almost like the Christians are in the crowd with the people who are watching the show.
Yeah.
And getting to chat to people and, hey, what did you think of the band? Look, we're going to be at church on Sunday. Does Michael come and speak at the church?
He would at times, yeah. So he would do that. Sometimes we would do a church on Sunday morning, and then evening would do a concert. And so it would be kind of, but why I was talking about the whole Red Rain. So that's why we felt like we needed to establish another website called RED Ministries, so we could share those testimonies.
Those testimonies are amazing.
And encourage the church of seeing the Lord is still moving, He's still healing, He's still doing all of these things. And so that's where and then as part of our ministry, as I said, like RED Ministries, reach, equip, and deploy. The deploy part, we've had certain like young families or young people that would join us for a period of time to see what it's like to be in the ministry, you know, and if that's something that the Lord has them to do. So we've been able to also deploy certain people or have certain people come alongside with us. We had a pastor friend from U.S. join us in Ukraine, and he absolutely loved it. So he's been able to share his testimony in the middle of concerts, how the Lord, you know, like in the street, and he was just amazed. Like one specific concert that he was a part of, I think that is also on our website, is the church couldn't advertise because anytime they put advertisements in, the local authorities would rip them off. So
Was this in Ukraine?
Ukraine.
Okay.
So we just literally came and they started setting up equipment in this main square, right? And people just started showing up. And so we've had like 2,500 to 5,000 like going in and out. And so there's this like the pastor's friend, like his associate pastor was there. He goes, people are just coming. I don't know what's going on. And so I was able to, so he was in the middle of that. Michael gave him an opportunity to share his testimony. And he comes from like a drug background, you know, where his father was a pastor, but his parents separated. And so he shares his testimony, how he got like basically almost got killed. It's a miracle he's alive. And so that area is actually, Ukraine has a big problem with drugs. So that is something that would minister to a lot of them just off the street. And so, but then again, the church is present and they're like, we've gone for 5 years to Ukraine, just doing more of it, like not an advertisement, but more letting people know that the church put on this event. And then 5 years into it, the churches are like, you know what, do an altar call. So we'd start doing an altar call in the middle of, at the end of concerts. And we would have like 80, 100 people receive right in the middle of the street.
Wow.
So that was like why, like for 20 years, we've been sowing and sowing into Ukraine, you know. I said it's kind of like, so our ministry is like kind of threefold, and Red Rain is a part of that. It's, as I said, it's a storefront of a rock band that people would not necessarily be kind of uncomfortable in. You're going into a neutral ground.
Yeah.
So we've done one of the stories actually I wanted to share. Speaking of Michael talking. We were in 2006, we went to Israel. So it was our first time. They had a war going on. And so we were there a month after a ceasefire was declared.
Wow.
And so it was a very much of a time where like, should we go? Should we not go? Is this wise for us as a band? This is before we even had kids. And so we come in and so before we flew in, we met with some Christians in Germany, and we mentioned to them like we're not sure, and they're like, you should go, you know, God's gonna do something really special. And they told us, he goes, you're gonna feel two things. You're gonna feel at home there, not necessarily that you would want to move there, but you'd feel at home there, and you'd feel peace that will cover you. And surely enough, when we arrived, nothing with him, he wants to move to Israel, but I felt very much at home.
Wow.
And very much peaceful, even though we were in the middle of this volatile. You didn't know if it was going to start up again when you're still there and this and that. And so there was a bit of a pressure on us. And we've had two concerts. We had a concert in Tel Aviv, in Promenade, and we had a concert on Zion Square in Jerusalem.
Wow. What was it like at Zion Square? Because I know that is notoriously a bit of a conflict zone for Muslims and Christians and Jewish people even. You know, it's like this verging of the three religions, and it can be quite volatile.
You know, the Zion Square was our second one. I would say the one that I really want to tell you about is Tel Aviv. Like,
tell me about Tel Aviv.
Like Zion Square was great. Let me just like, it was like kind of volatile in the sense they were like, oh yeah, before we started the concert, the pastors we're working with, they're like, yeah, they blew up a bomb here a year ago. We're like, oh, wonderful.
Good luck. Yeah. They blew up a bomb here a year ago.
It would be rare. And so even like why the Tel Aviv one was the first one. And so before we're meeting with the pastors and they're like, okay, just wanted to let you know, the moment you mentioned Jesus, be ready for persecution.
Yeah.
And so we're like, great, yeah, because there's going to be rabbis walking around, you know. And we're like, okay. So Michael is doing the concert, and like, no, the whole band is there. Like, actually, his brother Sarah's husband was part of the band
Steve,
at that
yeah.
time, Steve.
Oh, wow, cool.
Yeah, and so we're doing this concert, and in the middle of it, Michael kind of, there's a dance comp, there's kind of to get the crowd going, and then kind of towards the second part of it, he shares his testimony where he was literally at the Mount when him and Steve were, and Steve got swept away by the sea.
By a riptide or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
And so Michael jumped after him because Steve is the youngest, Michael's the oldest. And so he jumped after him, and the tide just took them both away.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so he shares this testimony, and he says like he was trying to fight it because he has Steve on, and Steve was quite a bit younger. And he goes and he remembered as he was like he had no energy left, and he says, and he remembered in his last moments of like his mom telling him, if we're not around, we can't help you, just cry out to Jesus. And then so he says in his last breath, he didn't even scream, yell, he just said Jesus and went under. And he says next thing he knows, he's on the seaside, Steve is running around, and he doesn't even know how he got there. Right.
What?
So he shares this testimony, right, in Tel Aviv on the promenade.
I'm about to cry, by the way. Like, this is amazing.
No, but this is a really cool part.
Yeah.
Like, I know the whole but the cool part was the whole thing. Remember we said the moment you mentioned Jesus?
Jesus,
Right.
yeah.
And he's as he's sharing this testimony, he tells this, the Holy Spirit speaks to him and says, thank them for Jesus. Thank them for me.
Thank the
And-
Jewish people.
Yeah,
for
thank the
Jesus.
Jewish people for me. And so Michael like speaks, and we're all like holding our breaths because we're like, oh, here we go.
Here we go. You know, persecution is coming.
I'm the cameraman, taking photos. I'm like thinking, oh no,
Get ready to run.
Yeah, do we need to run? And then he goes, I just want to thank your country for giving me my Jesus. People clapped.
Wow.
The Holy Spirit touched them. People came and gave us hugs. That was the era of remember your websites had those guest books?
Yes.
2006. And we had like people leaving remarks from Israel on the guest book saying, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for blessing us. Thank you for making us feel beautiful during this time.
Wow.
So it was just awe, And so in the moments like these, where we're in a completely different environment where it is religious, but what we found out, Tel Aviv is not as religious, so we didn't actually have rabbis, and so the Lord kind of gave that opportunity and kind of covered us and been able to minister to people. And actually the funny thing is in Israel, knowing Russian helped because almost every second person in Israel speaks Russian.
Strange. Like, why is that? Are they Russian people, or is it just a language
A lot
everyone
of
knows?
a lot of them. Remember, there's with diaspora. They ran to Germany and they ran to former USSR countries.
Yes.
Actually, Hasidic movement is from Ukraine.
Wow.
And so the city where I was born had a large Jewish community. And so when USSR fell apart, they were actually allowed to go back to their homeland.
Yes.
And since there's been like the anti-Semitism in the USSR and things like that, there's quite a few of them that did, and so I've been able to, talk to the ladies there, just talk to, because, again, we didn't speak Hebrew. There's some that don't speak English, but some that speak Russian,
That's so great.
And so being able to kind of minister in the midst of like the evangelistic events and being able to just talk to people and things like that. But I'm like, so we have many stories like that, that being able to do that and also being able to minister within a church environment. And as I said, we had friends that pastor friends that son got healed, with his hearing, which was really cool. So Michael had a conversation with him several years after, and he said, Luke, what do you actually are excited about the most? Like, what was it that you couldn't experience before? And he said, you know what? Hearing the birds.
Wow.
And I'm like, things that we take for granted, like
birds.
you're like, okay, birds. They wake us up in the morning. But for him, it was like, what? There's birds?
Yeah.
So
True. You would have no idea that these animals make that beautiful sound.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but for him, it was like, I think he didn't fully have like he had a hearing aids, and but he did have but I think there's certain frequencies that weren't there.
I see.
So his parents noticed since he was a toddler, because he would talk very loudly and he would play really loudly, and they couldn't understand why. And then he said so they were believing all his life. And so, yeah, to kind of see that side of it too. So, yeah, our ministry kind of has multiple facets of it, you know.
And so many ways that God can work in those different areas.
Oh, yeah,
Which
exactly.
I really love that. Like, I love the way that you have those three arms, you know. Yeah, reach, equip, deploy. So reach is the band.
Yeah.
Equip is when you go to the churches, and deploy is when you are partnering with other people to come with you to the mission field.
Yeah.
And yeah, wow, that's amazing. So has missions always been something that was on your heart, or did this kind of come after you met Michael?
You know, I would say the funny thing is what was always in my heart was travel. I've always enjoyed traveling. And then later on, as I said, I shared that at the church. You know, the Lord gave me it's really a grace on my life. So when Michael and I met, it's literally the first day we met, he asked me if I enjoy traveling. And I was like, well, I do actually.
Matter of fact.
Yeah, so whenever it came naturally, you know, so I feel for me personally that grew more into like a personal experiences and being part of things than necessarily, I wanted to grow up and be a missionary. As I said, I'm like, my grandparents were actually pastors in USSR in a country that's now called Georgia. I don't know, it might be in the news a little bit because
I actually have heard of that. Yeah.
Well, they've been having a little bit of a conflict now with their last election.
Yeah.
And so my grandparents were pastors there. But my father, when he went to uni to Ukraine, and again, this is all still part of USSR, so same country, he stopped going to church. And so when he met my mom, she wasn't a Christian. She had a Orthodox background, but not necessarily like a relationship with Jesus. And so I was brought up like where I had that kind of from my grandparents. I would spend summers with them when I was little. So we prayed, she taught me some hymns and things like that. But it wasn't until like we came to America that my parents actually became Christians. So at that time I was a teenager. And I would say I've seen what the Lord has done, you know, and but at the same time, I didn't fully have that personal relationship. And so I've had my kind of ups and downs, you know, teenage moments and things like that.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I was 18 that I really kind of received the Lord and really kind of received him and have a personal relationship and with him. And so, as I said, as I was kind of working things out and everything, I was just happy to be part of the worship team. I was just happy. And the funny part was that was my mom's prayer. She thought, oh, Lord, I want her to be in the ministry. But in her mind, she thought I would work at a good job because I worked as an accountant when Michael and I met, you know, in the bank. So my mom thought, oh, she'll have a good job and she'll be part of the worship ministry.
Yeah.
This is great.
Good enough. Yeah.
So when Michael and I met, she's like, that's not what I had in mind, Lord.
You're taking my daughter away.
Yeah. And so that part was kind of like, as I said, it wasn't necessarily, but I do feel like the Lord, even in our relationship, as I said, we've dated long distance. And we were both in a place where like, Lord, if it's not you, we don't want any part of it, you know, and we had many opportunities not to be together considering we're dating long distance.
Yeah.
But every step of the way, the Lord confirmed that that's for him. And so I feel like coming into a ministry, even though that wasn't maybe my life's goal or dream or things like that, the Lord kind of like eased me into it.
It's almost like God knew that Michael needed you, the ministry needed you. So it was like the Lord needed you to help Michael and Michael needed you to come alongside of him. I love it when we can see that in a couple, is that you fill each other's, you know, what we need for this ministry is a great accountant. What we need for Michael is a great wife, right? And the Lord just brings you together. Like even for this podcast, my husband is a sound engineer. He set this whole thing up for us last night.
wow.
And so, but I didn't know that when I married him, that this was something that he would be helping me with. And it's just really cool how the Lord just kind of brings it all together.
Oh, he does. And I think that's the best way.
Yes.
Because then you have it. And that's the whole thing, even with us and with our relationship. It's like, it's not us who are keeping us together. It's the Lord.
Yes.
You know? And so I'm like, there has to be a threefold attraction. There has to be spiritual, soulish, and physical, you know? So I'm like, sometimes if within a Christian environment, we only focus on the first two. Or we focus on, you know, or in the world, you focus on the third one, you know?
Yeah.
But I find that like in, you know, what the Lord, it's actually, I saved something. Sorry, I hope that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
In Hebrews, it says, by faith, Sarah herself was also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she has judged him faithful who had promised. Right. So I've shared this scripture, and why it came to my mind as we were driving here is. The thing is like the background of that scripture. Here's Sarah. She's following her husband's God, because remember, he's the one who heard from God.
That's right.
Not her. It was him. She respected him so much. She called him Lord, right? So she's 65 years old. They're traveling through the desert. They go into this town, and he goes, listen, can you say that you're my sister? Because you're a little bit too beautiful. I'm like, she's 65 years old and traveled through a
She
desert.
must have been stunning.
For a year, okay? I'm like, which one of us look great after going through a desert? You know, and then the Pharaoh takes her in, and the Pharaoh is known to be like a known rapist, you know?
Yeah.
And she goes into a harem, okay?
Yeah.
What's the purpose of
Yes.
them being in a harem? You know? And he never touched her.
Yeah.
So at that point, he became her God. It wasn't just his.
She had faith in God.
Yeah, she was able to conceive because she has found him faithful.
Yeah.
Not because Abraham had found him faithful.
Because Sarah found him.
Because she has herself found him faithful.
Sorry to interrupt. I hope you're being encouraged by this episode of the Outsider Sunday podcast. If you are, please let us know by commenting below, by liking and subscribing, and leaving us a 5-star review. Now, back to the episode. Yeah.
And so that's what I'm like, why I'm using that. I'm like, through the journeys, I've been able to find him faithful, and our reliance is on him, even in the relationship, our reliance is on God,
Yeah.
And so that's the best place to be, because as I said, a lot of times I feel like we meet somebody and we're like, oh, as long as he's cute, or as long as she's cute, or as long as this, or as long as we connect here, but it's really God who keeps you, together, and keeps you going, keeps you through, through challenges and things like that, and gives you ultimately the grace for what he has called you for.
Yeah. Absolutely. So how does your marriage dynamic work when you guys are traveling? Because do you travel constantly, or is it just like, a couple of months we'll go here and then we have a home base? What does travel and marriage look like?
I feel like it evolved a little. Whenever we first got married, honestly, or even when we had children, we traveled pretty much 7-8 months out of the year. We started in NZ, and we had the World Fair, and there were all of us traveling, the whole band, so there would be like 6 to 8 of us in the team. And we would basically make the trip from NZ to Asia, from Asia to Europe, and from Europe and finish in west coast of US. And my family's in Sacramento area, so we would, October-wise, probably if we would start in, let's say, May, June, I would just repack in October, and then we would go back for either we would spend the Christmas with my family and then join everyone in NZ, or we would go for Christmas to NZ, so that was the first few years. Even I want to say up till I want 2010. We've always had a goal to kind of make it into 3 trips, so to have a place to stay and kind of relax in between. So I would say now it looks more like 3 trips. We alternate sometimes Asia with Europe. Though our goal has really been Europe. So what we do is we have a base in California. We have a house in California, and we would basically pack and unpack. So we would do a tour through America, then come back, have about 3 weeks off, and then fly to Europe. for about 3 months, 2.5, 3 months. And then we would unpack and then we would either go to Asia or go to New Zealand.
Wow.
And so it's definitely full time. I know the longest year we've had where we continually traveled was 2005. We were on the road for 10 months.
Wow.
It's pretty busy.
Yeah.
We had managed to fit in Asia plus Middle East. 2005.
Wow.
Yeah, it was so funny.
Where did you go in the Middle East? Yeah.
So we went to, I'm trying to remember. We started with Singapore, and then from there we went to India. Then we had a week in Dubai, where they kept on trying to feed us Indian food. I tell people, unless you can commit to curry breakfast, lunch, and dinner, don't say you like spicy food. Because I was after a while, so by that time we stayed with an Indian couple in Dubai who kept on trying to take us to an Indian place, and we're like, we can't handle any more Indian food. Our stomachs are not like yours. Yeah. And then we had our 2 weeks in Pakistan, which was funny because the smell of breakfast was already sounded like a heartburn to me. And between that frustration, the little things, I didn't realize that it was a most dangerous country to go to as an American until we went to Germany afterwards, and I had to add more pages to my passport in the U.S. Embassy, and there was a list of countries Americans should not visit, and number one on that list was Pakistan. This is 2005. This is when Osama bin Laden lived there.
Oh, wow.
And we were in Islamabad, taking walks at nighttime. We're I'm telling you, just the Lord covered us.
I was just thinking that the Lord was walking with you through the desert.
Well, several years after, there was a movie about Daniel Pearl or something like that. It's with Angelina Jolie. But anyways, it talked about that time in history, how this Jewish reporter got kidnapped in Islamabad, and I'm like, oh my goodness, walked on those streets at nighttime by ourselves.
Angels all around.
Yeah. Well, and there's the whole thing. There's that grace that covers, you know, at that moment where you just do feel peace and you can go through stuff. As I said, I really remember that step of faith was in when we went to Israel in 2006, because it was that kind of we're going into a war zone. But then later on in 2014, the memory of that is what gave us faith to go to Ukraine.
Wow.
When there were, because Ukrainian war is from 2014. It really escalated in 2022, but it really goes back then. And we actually minister in the eastern parts.
Wow.
And so that one, so as I said, I feel the grace and the faith builds, the Lord doesn't throw you in the deep end,
Yeah.
He kind of, and maybe it's different for different people, but it covers you, and kind of, He leads you and covers you. So there's a certain places, I don't recommend for everyone to go to war zone, but it was that grace that covered us for that season, and so that's kind of where it's at. So Pakistan is the same thing, it's one of those things. My biggest frustration was somebody made me some clothes that I had to wear and they didn't fit it because they never took my measurements or something. They wanted me to put some. So I was that was the biggest.
That was your biggest worry.
For being in Pakistan for I think 2 weeks.
Wow.
It was not realizing that during all of this, the Lord just covered, and we were in these volatile areas in Islamabad,
Wow.
So.
Yeah. And when did your kids come along? And were they there with you during those times?
So that was a couple of years. So Josh was born in 2007. So that was 2005, 2006 was before that we had kids. 2007 was again, with Josh, it was a different dynamic. That was really kind of where we questioned. We're Lord, do you still want us to do what we do? And so when he was born, he was, I think, about 2 months when we did a trip around the U.S. So we had a 3-hour time zone difference because, U.S. has 3 time zones. And so from California to New York, it's 3 hours, So he did very well. We have photos of him, changing his nappies on the plane.
How old was he at that point?
2 months, 2 or 3 months.
Goodness. Wow.
So, but at 5 months, we took him to Germany. And so that was, as I said, the big thing. You're how's the kid going to do with a travel to Germany, 9-hour time zone. Like, I mean, you hear from adults, they can't switch that, you
Yeah.
know? And we were there for only 1 month, and we went in November. And November is like beginning of winter. In, like, Germany, it could snow.
Yeah.
I don't think it snowed when we were there, but it was like really close to. And so he did well. Like, he had about 4 days where he would wake up at 5 in the morning or something, which I know normal for most people.
That's actually not bad. Yeah.
But for us, he wakes up at 10.
Oh, no.
So we're like, all right, we'll sit with you. And then so he switched, and then we traveled. And then when we went back, we were actually flying when he turned 6 months. We were, we flew back, and then he just took him. Next day, he was completely fine. He switched the time zones.
Wow.
One day.
And so then I suppose then that just continued.
And so, yeah, so from that point on, as I said, that same, like, the Lord gave us that, you know, that's the scripture I was telling you about. Is, that same grace covered them, you know. And so we've been in and out. He's been to Israel.
Wow.
I think that's kind of like us. We haven't taken them to Dubai or anything like that. But Israel actually have a funny story. So Josh was about 1 year old when we went to Israel, and we spent some time in Jerusalem. There's a Bible school that we partner with, so we were able to stay there for like a week or something like that. And so the Sabbath started. So it's Friday night, you know, it's like this big party when you go, and I love Jerusalem on Sabbath. Like,
Yeah.
Tel Aviv is not as exciting, you know, like, but Jerusalem is very religious. So everyone like kind of, you know, their Sabbath starts.
So you said they were partying. So is it like they're partying in preparation for the rest?
So the thing, like, basically they don't cook, right? So they cook prior to that. And so they all go out. So we went to Wailing Wall. You go in, and it looks like multiple church services having their own little get-togethers. Wow. So there's these young guys that are like hugging each other, dancing in circles. You have all these stereotypical things that you would want to see in Israel.
Yeah.
They happen in Jerusalem, like on Friday night.
Yeah.
Because again, as I said, it's the beginning of Sabbath. That's kind of like their church service, you know. And so we go in, and there's people everywhere. It was so much fun, you know. And then we go down out of the Jaffa Gate, which is like the Christian gate of the Old Jerusalem, and there's a shopping area there. So, and Josh is like 1 year old. He has his little trolley. He's pushing along. He's just started walking, right?
Yeah.
And we're walking, and all of a sudden, this lady comes up, like this kind of a heavier set lady comes up, just like picks him up, starts kissing him. We've never seen her, and we're all like stumped, you know, because we're like, why is this stranger kissing my child, you know? And her friend comes. She goes, it's okay. She's Miss Israel 1965. She has 5 grandchildren of her own. And I'm like, okay. And then she puts him down and carries on.
Wow.
And leaves. And we're like, okay, Josh, you've been kissed by Miss Israel 1965. We told that to some of our Jewish friends. They thought it was hilarious because it's such a part of their culture, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I was like, oh, Josh. So, you know, so again, as I said, this, like, it was so cute. And like, this is the land where Jesus walked, you know?
Yeah.
And this lady
It's
just
pretty
blessed
special.
him, and, you know.
Yeah.
Just random lady
Yeah.
on the street, Miss Israel 1965.
Wow. There you go.
So it was stuff like that where we could see the Lord's hand is like, he's striving, he's walking, he's like, you know, he was
gonna be
he was a
okay.
band mascot, you know. He was like sitting on laps of band members and trying to learn drums.
Wow.
You know,
And,
so-
and then did it change when you had your second, though?
No, I think it was easier to accept, you know, because you've already seen what the Lord has done for him.
True.
You know, but it was a slightly different dynamic with him, because that's around the time Michael's mom was sick, and she was, so our focus was a little bit different, you know.
Yeah.
And so in 2010, and Zach would have been only 1 year old, Michael's mom passed away. And so it changed where we traveled more as a family.
I see.
Versus, and then we would have the band join us for certain
Yeah.
parts of the year, and we got a new team because the year that we took off, most of the band members got married, decided to stay home,
And then
So-
everyone has families and
yeah. And so actually the Lord blessed us. We were about to minister during that year off. We met up with a pastor that we work with in Ukraine, and he said, hey, you coming to Ukraine? We're like, well, we're taking a break from the band. And he's like, well, still, come. I'll give you my guys. We're like, okay. And then the Lord opened the door for us to be able to partner with those guys, and because our focus has changed mostly to Europe with the outreach, and so we didn't have to fly them everywhere with us, and so they would meet us, and they're great musicians, and so they were actually like full time anytime we were in Europe with us for I want to say 8 or 10 years, until the war hit. Yeah.
And they're Ukrainian.
They're Ukrainian, yeah.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah, and so sometimes we would have like maybe another electric guitarist come in from the U.S. with us, and they're, I mean, amazing musicians.
Wow.
So they're actually 2 of them are in U.S. We helped them set up. They're in California, but they can't travel because they have to get their paperwork done. And so but during that time, our boys started playing instruments as well.
Yes.
So they've been playing about, I think, 4 or 6 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you came to our church on that Sunday, it was Michael and then the boys in the back. So how old are they now?
So Josh is 17 and a half and Zach is almost 15 and a half.
How are they, like, I suppose now they can kind of reflect a little bit on their upbringing, and how do they feel about it all?
I think essentially when they were little, it was like, that's what you grew up with. So they didn't feel any difference, you know? Because again, like we literally had to, like, not every kid gets to see their parents as much as you do.
That's
had
true.
to remind them that. I think when they became teenagers, like when they first became teenagers, like, okay, it would be nice to have more like friends and things like that. They have friends worldwide. They have friends in Germany. They have friends in France. They have all of this. But being able to kind of have that normal thing. So they started playing sports. So they play rugby actually in California.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, especially, they're half Kiwis.
Well, there's the whole thing is like Michael shares that as his testimony, because he was like, Lord, if we're going to be, and because the Lord really moved us to be more like based in America. It's a halfway trip to Europe, you know, and we're in NZ, we're halfway to Asia, but we have so much more work in Europe and focus on Europe that it's easier for us to travel, because literally we're 2 hours drive from San Francisco. It's one flight from San Francisco to anywhere in Europe. Like Switzerland is one flight. It's
great.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm like things that would not be one flight from here.
No.
So when that was happening, Michael is like cried out to the Lord. He's like, I cannot relate to any of the sports.
So he's not got into baseball or American football.
Well, he just doesn't relate to them. It's rugby and cricket.
Yes.
He's a Kiwi.
So I'm glad to see that he's fostered that with his children.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately we couldn't do cricket because the seasons where we're out, but we actually met some cricket teams in our area. So anyways, rugby is the second largest like growing sport in California.
Cool.
Because of
love to see that. Yeah.
There's I think California has 6,000 players.
Wow.
Yeah, so our boys pretty much played from ages 6 and 8.
Wow.
Yeah, so they've kind of really developed that, and Michael started coaching, so he coaches when we're not traveling.
That is so special. Like, that is incredibly special to be able to almost like have this missionary life, this overseas traveling, doing all these things, but then also to be able to get to be a dad and to coach your kids playing rugby. I mean, I feel like that's really, really special.
Oh, it definitely is. And again, and that's ultimately what it is. A lot of people are like, oh, you're giving up. I'm like, we're giving up certain things, but the Lord actually comes alongside and blesses us with others, And so they've been able to kind of develop and build friendships through that.
Because I'm guessing that, assuming that they've been homeschooled this whole time. And so they're not getting the school thing. But I think it's really cool that they do have friends all over the world, and I suppose, I don't know, it's interesting. It's going to be really interesting to see what your boys decide to do. Do you think they'll stay with the band? Are they happy being in the band with Dad?
At this point, this is Josh, in America, there's only 12 years of school, so he's in year 12.
Okay.
And so he's finishing actually in May. In foreseeable future, we've talked he will continue with us and then take some uni courses and things like that and see where he wants to go. Zach still has a couple of years left, so he's going to continue with that. And so actually we were able to, as part of the homeschooling and part of the last 2 years of their high school, they're able to take uni courses. So they're
Oh, great.
So they've kind of getting some stuff. So America makes you take some of the what are they called? General education classes. So for instance, as part of your uni, you have to take English. So they're getting a lot of those courses out of the way, so they don't have to physically go there, and they do them online. And so we're in the different stages of that. But honestly, it's a miracle we've gotten that far. I was never planning on homeschooling when so the Lord putting that. I remember when they were little. Like, I mean, I think Josh was about like less than a year old, and we were meeting with friends of ours that we stay with in Oregon, and she goes, have you considered homeschooling? I was like, no. I was like, how am I going to help him with trigonometry? She's like, honey, he doesn't start out with trigonometry.
You will grow with him. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. And so I've had along the ways, like friends and like the ministry partners and things like that encouraged, and every step of the way would be like, okay, but honestly, by the time they reach that, college age, they're a lot more self-sufficient, And so as far as going forward, we'll see what the Lord has, at this point, for the nearest foreseeable future, they will be with us, and see what the Lord does, from there.
Absolutely. See what the Lord does.
Every step of the way the Lord had provided, and every step, like even as I said with the boys, every step of the way the Lord had provided for them to be able to have sports, to be able to do these. But the funny thing is as they get older now, they're understanding. They're like, oh wow, we spent summer in Greece, doing ministry. We've met our German friends in Greece and between ministry, or we went to Croatia for a few days while we were on their way to this ministry and stuff like that.
It's a pretty incredible life.
So I think they're just now getting into the age where they're like,
they can appreciate it, I suppose. Yeah.
They're beginning to appreciate it more. Again, but at the same time, it's the same challenge. All of us have to have that personal relationship with Jesus.
Exactly.
And all of us have to trust him for things. And all of us, like I shared that story with Josh's shoes,
Yeah.
It's every step of the way we have to trust him for everything.
Let's get that story of the shoes, because I heard it on the Sunday. But you were in, what country were you in?
We were actually at that time multiple countries, but the story is about Monte Carlo.
Yes, in Monte Carlo with, how old was he at that time? 1?
So he would have been 1.
Yeah, and he had no shoes.
Well, we were looking for his first pair of shoes, and we were traveling through Europe at that time. So we traveled through France, through Germany, and we started getting further to the south of France, and that's when you hear the cons and, Nice and all of those places become more and more expensive. And our next stop was Monte Carlo, and, we gotten to know, so the lady who was hosting us in Monte Carlo, so as I said, we were like, our budget was what, $40 US, 25 euro at that time. Euro was quite high at that time in history. And so we're just kind of shopping around, looking around, but not really. It's between Michael and I, not really sharing with anyone. And so we arrived into Monte Carlo, and pretty much the day that we arrived, within an hour of our arrival, the lady comes to me and she says, the Lord put it on my heart to buy him his first pair of shoes.
Wow. Not knowing that that's what's going on behind the scenes, and that's what you and your husband are looking for.
But that's how you know it's the Lord, isn't it?
And I think it's just so special, the way that, yes, we can see these big, amazing things that the Lord does, like opening a deaf person's ears. Yeah. But the Lord still meets us on these little things that don't seem that important in the scope of things. But just what a blessing and what an encouragement that this lady had it on her heart to buy the pair of shoes. And just for the listeners, just tell us about those shoes and how much they were.
Yeah. Well, so we go to this boutique, and she says, oh, I know just the place. There's a boutique I shop at. for my granddaughter. And so we walk in, and I'm like, everything in that boutique is expensive. The word boutique is expensive. Well, like I shared that on Sunday, I'm like, this is the place that secondhand shops sell like Chanel and, so obviously nothing within
A Birkin bag.
20
Let's find one of those.
exactly. Nothing within €25 budget.
Yeah.
And so she's just says, oh, she's the one who picked them up. And she says, oh, these would be perfect. And, I was actually thinking, should I bring him? I'm like, and I forgot. But they look like something Prince George wore when he was little, and it's something that both kids were able to wear. So it was, and they were like €85, which at that time was $120. I mean,
Wow, for a little pair of shoes.
I know.
How
I'm
special.
I don't know if you've seen them.
You brought them to church. I saw them. They looked amazing. They looked like Prince George could wear them today. Well, he's too big, but you know what I mean.
Well, I said when I was watching, the when Prince George was born, when he was like, the photos, I was like, oh, look, he's wearing shoes like Josh.
That's pretty cool.
Probably did not get them at the same boutique, but
no, they would have been
made.
full price, specially made. Yeah. Well, that's so cool that the Lord just has what I can kind of see as we're talking now. It's just the track of like, as the Lord sees us, choose to live our life for him and to pursue the kingdom of God. What is the Bible verse? Seek first the kingdom of God, and all of these things, all the things that you need will just be taken care of. And just what a great example of how that happens.
Well, and I think also sometimes not even things that we need, even the desires of
things
our
that we
hearts.
don't even know.
Yeah. The desires of our hearts, He puts desires of into our hearts, and he's faithful to complete them.
Yes.
And honestly, it's not really about amounts, it's not about status, it's not about those things. Like what you said, sometimes it's the little things. I have another story which was kind of funny. And so for our wedding day, my best friend gave me this watch, and it was like not very expensive. It was like under $100 or something, like a watch, but I really loved the shape of it. And so we started traveling, and we traveled through, so we arrived into Pakistan, and I had my rings and that watch sitting on the side table, and kids would run in and out of we're staying in the compound of the pastor, and so it's pretty safe, and so kids running in and out, and we're about to leave, and my watch is gone, and I didn't pay attention to it. So again, as I said, not an expensive item. It was just special. My best friend gave it to me on the wedding day, and so we're about to leave. And I was like, I can't find that watch anywhere. And I'm thinking kids might have just ran in and knocked it off. And I'm like, can we look? And this and that. And the pastor goes, it was his grandsons. I asked my grandsons. They said they did not go near there. But he's like, we'll find your watch. Don't worry. And I was like, again, we just started. This is like 2005. We just started. I started the ministry, being part of the ministry full time, 2004. I was like, Lord, this is not fair. I'm like literally sitting there praying. I'm like, we've been like given everything. I'm like, I want my watch back. This is special. Again, this is not an expensive item, right? In the big scheme of things, it's like the Lord is like, get over it. Right? And so this is like about May or something, June, May, and September, I get an email from that pastor, and he goes, we found your watch. And I was like, oh, where was it? Like, was it underneath this or that? And he goes, it was actually stolen.
Wow.
So which was a miracle. I had my wedding ring there.
So they left the wedding ring and they took the watch.
Yes. And it was a young lady that was their helper. That would come in and help clean up.
Yeah.
It was her who took it. And how they found out, the pastor's daughter had a friend that lived next door to this young lady, and she saw her walking out wearing that watch.
Oh my goodness.
And so they confronted her. She gave the watch back. She goes, the watch is on the way to you. So about September, October, I received this watch. It's scratched up. But it's like, remember my prayer?
Yeah.
Right? And so then I'm like, it had scratches on it. It had this. And then the clip started getting loose. So this is like fast forward a couple of years. But I was like holding on for the sentimental
this precious
value.
watch.
Yeah. And I'm like, it really needed to go. So we're in NZ in 2008, right? And the clip kept on coming open. And we're walking this road, and I'm like, sometimes I would fling my hand, and I would just catch it. It would fly. It would start flying off. And so here I am. I'm like, it flew off. And then at that point, I was like, okay, Lord, I know you've like kept this watch. I'm like, I'm releasing
By the
it.
grace of God,
Right?
time to let it go.
I'm releasing it to you, right? And again, as I said, that watch was like maybe $75 or something like that. Like not in the big scheme of thing, not this precious item, right?
It's not a
Just
Rolex.
the sentimental value.
Yeah.
And so I just released it, and I'm like, okay. So we're walking for 2 weeks past that road with Michael, and as I remember that because Josh was little. And a day before we're about to fly out back into US, I walked past that same road, and here's my watch.
Wow.
And I was like, oh wow, thank you, Lord. And Michael's like stumped. He goes, do you know what just happened? We've been walking there for 2. So here's the thing, that watch is still sitting like in my bedroom in a box. But I'm like, it's just little things.
Yeah.
Where the Lord is like, I know I didn't have
That
to
the
do
Lord
this for you.
cares. Yeah.
But he's in every part of our lives. Like we laugh. I'm like, I pray sometimes. I'm like, before I go see my hairdresser, I was like, Lord, help her to cut my hair. Right? And so I told her, she says, yeah, well, you're well prayed up. But that's the whole thing, is personal relationship. Why I shared that. A personal relationship with the Lord is not this like, okay, I pray this, I do this or that. He wants to know us personally. He wants to know. And I find sometimes the little things that are more precious than huge things,
Yeah.
because it's like they wouldn't feel important in the big scheme of things, but they're important because they're important to us, and the Lord knows us,
Yeah, it's wonderful. I thought we could revisit Ukraine for a little bit, because I'm really interested to know now how things have gone since the conflict has escalated. Have you been back there? Because Michael said on the Sunday that they'd been delivering aid and things like that. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So physically, last time we went to Ukraine, it was 2018. And before, we were supposed to schedule to go into 2020, and then COVID hit. And then when the COVID ended, the war started. And so what we've been doing, throughout that whole time, we've built strong relationships with the churches. One of the churches that we work with, the pastor is in charge of about 400 churches, and so we basically would give our dates, and they would organize events for us, and then we would come in. So we've had a trust with them, and so when this conflict escalated, was actually we reached out. He actually reached out to us, and because we wanted to see how he was doing. He was not in Ukraine when that happened, and so he was in Ghana when the war started.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And so he didn't actually have to go back, and because the moment he would go back, he couldn't leave the country.
He would be
was in that
enlisted.
age group
Yeah.
that would be. They don't necessarily enlist them, but they're not allowed to leave the country. And so we get a phone call from him, and we were like on Viber, so it's like a video call, and we're like, why is he sitting in a dark room, And and then we're like, he's not in Poland, is he? And so he goes, I really. He goes, I couldn't sleep for a week, thinking I'm in the safety, and my pastors and my church is in the middle, in the thick of it, and I'm like in the safety. And so he basically said goodbye to his wife, who was recovering from a knee surgery.
Oh my goodness.
And crossed the border, knowing that he would not be able to leave, So he's in his 50s, and the age that they're not allowing men to leave from 18 to 60. And he's at that time was in the mid 50s,
Wow.
And so at that point, Michael's like, how can we help you?
Part 2 of this recording will be released next week, but if you'd like to support our ministry further and receive full episodes right away, please feel free to become a Patreon supporter by clicking on the link below. Coming up next week on the Outside of Sunday podcast.
So in the meanwhile, Michael sends out emails to all of our partners and friends and the ministry friends and saying, hey, this is what we feel like we need to do. If this is on your heart, you can come alongside. Within, I think, 3 weeks or less, we got $100,000 US. That actually allowed us to send 6 semis full of food and supplies to Ukraine. Basically, Antioch sits in a valley surrounded by mountains on one side and the sea on the other side. And it was completely demolished. And the people allowed us, like, which was beautiful, they allowed us to pray for them. They're Muslim. They were so hospitable. Like, they're staying in tents. They're like, coffee or tea? And we're
bless.
like, and you feel bad saying, I'm like, sure, I'll have a coffee. And then they're like, as soon as you drink tea, you're like, no, thank you. They're like, cigarettes? So apparently in Turkey, it's like coffee, tea and cigarettes. I was like,
Thanks again for listening to this episode of the Outsider Sunday podcast. We have some exciting news. We're starting a monthly giveaway for our Outsider community. And all you have to do is let us know your favorite moment from this episode. Any thoughts that you had, a Bible verse that might have come to mind, a personal experience that you can relate to from this episode. And you will automatically go in the draw for this monthly giveaway. See, we want you to be a part of this podcast too. Please let us know your thoughts and insights in the comments. And you never know, your comment could be included in a future episode of this podcast or you could be our monthly winner. Thank you so much for your support of this ministry. And don't forget to let somebody you know about this podcast. Outside of Sunday is part of the Outsider Network and is made with the help of Inspirational Media.